Should we kick it off?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you both in person and virtually. So thank you for joining us today. For those online, feel free to post questions in the chat as well. We have a moderator there. For everybody here in person, if you have a question, feel free to let us know, and then we can maybe go through and answer some of those questions after the ones that we have lined up. But maybe we should kick off some introductions first. I'm Sarah Khalife. I'm a principal solutions engineer here at GitHub, and I've been at GitHub for about 3.5 years now, which is mind-blowing. Time has flown by. I've been lucky enough to work with some of the customers that are on virtually here, but also many more of our enterprise customers throughout the last 3 years.
Hi, I'm Neha. I'm a VP of engineering here at GitHub, and I oversee an interesting setting of areas. I like to call it the daily developer workflow. So issues, projects, PRs, repos, your CLI tools, your GitHub desktop tools, mobile, code search, and some of our infrastructure around like how we manage our monoliths and APIs and SDKs and webhooks. So that's what I get to work on a day-to-day basis. It's the dream of a lifetime. And I've been at GitHub for 5 years, so several eons basically when it comes to startup years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabor. I am the EM on the developer tools team at Block. I have been in this role for the last 2+ years. I have been with Block for 5-ish years. My team, Developer Tools, owns GitHub productivity tooling, so GitHub Apps. We own this engagement. We are trying. We own CLI tooling, and we, in our role, get regularly engaged with vendors, third-party vendors, evaluate their value, and yeah, that sums it up. So
Awesome. Gabe?
Sure. Gabriel Cohen. I'm a senior principal and fellow at Blue Yonder. I've been there for many years. You can look later how many. As far as being in Blue Yonder, other than being architect in the platform Blue Yonder, I'm founder and participant in a few guilds in Blue Yonder, and one of them being the DevOps enablement. Very passionate about developer experience and how that contributes to our mental well-being and productivity throughout Blue Yonder and outside of Blue Yonder as well, because there are a lot of lessons learned, as you will hear in this session. So that's it.
Great. That's great. Thank you both for joining us for our panel today. We'll be talking about the journey to the cloud. We've had customers go from not only GitHub Server, but other tools from Bitbucket to GitLab to other tooling that have all decided to move to GitHub, and many of those cases are moving to the cloud. Decrease of infrastructure it's running, decrease of time to maintain a server instance. So I think there are a couple different reasons, but I'm not here to talk about that. That's why we have an awesome customers to chat a little bit more about it. Before we kick it off, for some of our the customers on the line here for the panel today, can you give us both a little background on what your current scenario is of using GitHub? Are you using GitHub for just SCM? Are you using Actions? Are you using, what types of tools are you using? Just give us a little kind of state of the union of where you're seeing GitHub as
okay.
tool today.
Awesome. So we use GitHub as an SCM for sure, and it's very core to what we do. So we depend on GitHub being up 99.999% of the time. We also are heavy users of GitHub Advanced Security and related features like code scanning, or secret scanning. We are limited users of certain other features like projects, I think is one. We are early adopters of many features, so merge queues that I'm particularly excited about is something we have been early adopters and have been collaborating with GitHub on evolving essentially. Search and those are the things that come to mind. But
Sure. So of course, SCM, but very much like Gabor mentioned, things related to security. So advanced security for token scanning and security vulnerabilities as far as injections. And really GitHub is our linchpin for code quality. So we have other vendors that we integrate with the help of GitHub, such as Codacy, to measure code quality in there, and a few others. So we are pushing heavily on our vendors to be GitHub ready. So either to create GitHub apps or to create GitHub actions to make sure they more tightly integrate into that. We're also not using at this point GitHub projects. We mainly, our source of truth is Jira and Aha. But we do use the concept of GitOps quite a bit in order to kind of manage processes inside of the company, and to use the concept of peer review that you have in PR, that you have in SCM, to manage many other automations in the company and to drive it through, of course, CI/CD, through GitHub workflows and actions throughout the organization. So SCM, but there are a lot of side benefits that we found out afterwards by using GitHub Actions.
So I'm kind of interested, I know whenever it comes to our tooling and our tool set, right, there's a lot of friction for us to change and move on to anything new. And usually there's a big buildup before you actually make that decision to move forward. And so I was curious if I could ask the two of you, what was the main catalyst for making the transition from an on-prem SCM solution to GHEC?
So for us, we used an on-prem Bitbucket instance by Atlassian. One of the things that we noticed with that product is that it was not getting as much attention from the vendor that we wanted to. So that was definitely a catalyst. Another thing was our internal decisions, building custom tooling into the versions of Bitbucket that were not aging well. So we kind of got locked into a certain version. And so that didn't help us advance with the time. And thirdly, I guess just being on-prem and maintaining something that, like takes up cycle time from engineers to feed care, make it reliable. Essentially, that was the third catalyst, to just like not have that responsibility and then have someone who dedicated just dealing with scalability, reliability, making it just work for us.
Yeah. So for us, there were a few things. The first being is, where do you want the focus of your engineers in the company to be? Our bread and butter is supply chain optimization at Blue Yonder, and we want to put as many developers and architects on that task. When you're talking about having other abilities such as development support, which SCM and similar things are, you really need to think through about your SLA. Many times the reason why it's an afterthought is that people sometimes don't measure the SLA, all the downtimes of your SCM server and otherwise. In order to properly have an SLA, you need to, what we call, have a 24/7 kind of follow the sun support for your servers all the time. And that is really expensive to do properly. We said that it's probably cheaper for us to give it to somebody that's their bread and butter. So that's the first thing. So operating services yourself, and I know that there is an argument about balancing between on-prem and cloud and all things that you do, but for things that are not really your core competence in managing your own offering to your customers, you should probably offload, and that's the conclusion that we got to. Other things that we on the discovery path we found is that we get more visibility using the GitHub Enterprise offering from previous offerings. So get to see, for instance, what are the tokens that are being committed into your source code, right? This is not something that I think Bitbucket ever offered, certainly not with the amount of partners that GitHub has. And then, kind of like having almost like all in one, the fact that a developer doesn't need to go to a million different places in order to understand the security and quality of their code, and they can have kind of like one pane, one UI in order to look at that is a huge advantage, and I suggest people don't overlook it. It's not nice to have. It's really productivity.
I feel like the productivity aspect across the board is consistent across any of the, I guess, products that we try to do. From the community side to the productivity side, comes back to leveraging whatever we have available to make you as a developer, you as an enterprise, you as an individual a lot more productive than hopefully that you were before. So what was the most appealing aspect that kind of confirmed that choice to move to enterprise cloud?
Okay, I'll go first. When we were looking at alternatives, really Atlassian was out, pretty much for the same reasons I mentioned. We looked at, we had a very thorough evaluation of two other options, one of them being GitHub and the other being GitLab. And we looked at, many of the standard things you would do, like performance, price, reliability, and so on. And many of those came up like comparable. But what stood out for GitHub were just developer recognition. So developers were way more like familiar with the GitHub experience to begin with, because GitHub is the go-to place for everything open source. So that's a huge advantage. So that did come up on our radar as one thing. The other one that other two I will mention. One was extensibility as a, we could just port anything that we wanted to do custom, like specific to block needs easily via apps. And then the ecosystem, I think Gabe also mentioned, is that it already had a thriving ecosystem of third-party solutions. So many vendors just have a solution to begin with, but if they don't, you can easily push them to develop one. And then, what's the third one? Let me just use my cheat sheet, sorry. Third one, oh, I know. That was the product roadmap. So it has born to be like a really good thing is that GitHub is on the journey to not just be an SEM solution, but something I refer to as an ecosystem of developer tooling. And so you can just look at it, from beginning of like ideation, capturing ideas, so projects, to IDE, so VS Code is something that we use profoundly. And then you go all the way, every activity to deploy, and maybe some beyond, like they try to get a solution for. And again, just echoing something that Gabe already mentioned, is this notion of single pane of glass. So reducing like fragmentation of, so many tools to visit to get something done. You can have one place to go and have everything in, like you find your answers. So yeah, those are the.
So for us, it's funny because we see a lot of parallels between what GitHub has gone through from being open source and being more enterprise, not more enterprise focused, but venturing into the enterprise world as far as the platform team. And we met with VPs that were moving around, and GitHub at that time got bought by Microsoft, but didn't kind of like, I don't want to say lose its kind of mojo thing, which is great. Kudos to both Microsoft and GitHub. But what we saw, in addition to everything that we already said, is the fact that they develop really a platform that is extensible. You can develop a platform and be very opinionated about certain things, and every new offering that you want to grow, the platform will need to implement. And what GitHub did was something very similar that we do in our platform, which is extension points, have more extension points to create an ecosystem of not just partners, not just official partners. Of course, you're going to have official partners. Many of them are vendors as well, but the ability to create a community for GitHub Actions and now for reusable workflows, etc. And for us, as we were getting closer to decide on SCM and whether to take this or another one, or do a mix of SCM and CI/CD, let's say with Jenkins on the cloud, which we had Jenkins on premises, the one that was the deciding factor at that point was the fact that GitHub came with GitHub Actions, because it was an easy win, and it's not that there were not challenges along the way. As I don't know if people that hear from GitHub, we gave a pretty hard time to GitHub related to, security reviews and all that stuff. And GitHub was an amazing, I'm not going to disclose too much, but an amazing engineering partner to go and disclose fully what works for them, what didn't work for them, and how quickly they mitigate things. And we see it throughout our journey with GitHub, how listen, it's not like you're not going to have downtimes. We know that we have downtime. So first of all, GitHub comes very clean as far as downtime when it is, as opposed to many others that will maybe not report about it. But then the whole concept of DevOps culture and blameless postmortem that they publish to us, people say, oh, does it ruin your confidence? No, it actually increases the confidence, because we know exactly what is the culture and constant improvement in GitHub. So we feel even more confident in GitHub as an engineer organization and rely on it as a platform.
I feel so seen by what Gabe just said, because as a VP of engineering, I was just in an availability call yesterday doing a postmortem on some of the stuff that had happened recently, right? And it's nice to see that the work that we're putting in and how we do run our operations when it comes to coming clean to our customers, making sure we have something to report back is received well. So thank you. Yeah. I mean, I don't do anything.
Makes my job easier.
I'm just a manager of managers at this point, right? So, but it is really important for us to interpret some of these things that happen, which we totally, every single time anything goes wrong, all we think about are all the people on the end who can't get their work done, right? And we understand the gravity of that responsibility, but also that a lot of anything that we do find, right? It's usually the system should never allow things like that to happen in the first place. So how can we fortify our systems and make that improve? Something that Gabe said, I'm kind of interested in hearing a little bit more about. Maybe it's, wanting to hear the fun stories and the drama, right? I'm curious about some of that pushback and the challenges you heard, right? So my question is, when you face internal challenges, when you made that decision, okay, cool, we want to move to GitHub, right? It's one thing to make that decision and then say, okay, cool, let's move forward. But now you have to convince everyone around you, right? And so what were those internal challenges that you faced when you're proposing to move to GHEC, and how did you overcome some of those? Yeah, so I'll have Gabe start and then we'll go to the board. Yeah.
Sure. So first of all, the biggest challenge is yourself, because you don't just want to say, oh, let's move to GitHub, but you want to be able to defend that decision in the future. One of the things that we do, and I know the industry does in general, are architectural decision records, ADRs, which is to say, okay, we had this problem, in-house SCMs and CI/CD, and they had problems. These are the options, and that's why we chose certain things. So you have to defend it. So first of all, you have to come up with that. And the obvious thing was, should we put our code in a place that is outside of our network? Really? What does it mean? And then you start having really tough discussions whether your network is really the safest place, considering what they say that 60% of the hacks usually come from your network. So the fact that is on your network, that's defense and perimeter, it's not necessarily more safe. So the question is how much GitHub will make it safer, right? Access to code without VPNs, no VPNs is why? Now everybody in the world can access, it's going to leak everywhere. Well, you kind of try to address the points one by one. The other one, and these are things that are general for Blue Yonder or any other one that moved from in-premises to others. The other one is organizational structure. And this is something that I still have the guys in GitHub know. I have my reservations. There are hierarchies in a company, and you need to be able to do something that is more than a flat organization. And the question that you start saying yourself right now is this organization right for me? Is this still right for me? Considering I cannot represent the segments, the departments, the pillars that I have in my organization. But little by little, you start realizing that it does give you the tools using GitOps to describe the structure of your organization and to build teams, even though GitHub didn't give you the exact structure and it did not, spoon feed you, right? They do give you the tools in order to implement it yourself. The moment that you start instilling these kind of things inside of your company and you start getting early successes, then people start follow. I'm personally a big fan. So there is times for top-down, orders and everybody do this. But in my history, I feel like, grassroots kind of like people saying, did you see how cool this was? Gets much better adoption and much less adoption theatrics.
Okay. Unsurprisingly, some of my comments will echo, will be sounding very similar after Gabe's. One of our things to make sure that we are making the right decisions, we have a somewhat similar process. We call it SPADE, which stands for setting, people, alternative, decide, and explain. But essentially documenting a decision and why we are making it at that moment in time. So we lean into that process when making such big decisions, and that's a way to invite comment from stakeholders and make sure that we are making the right decision. So we use that obviously in this, and part of that going in is really just collecting data and convincing set people, the affected parties, that this is the right decision. As Gabe mentioned, moving to the cloud and off-prem comes with the security challenge, right? Like how can you make sure your code is safe there? Of course, Block, and used to be Square, is a financial company with very sensitive, our code is very sensitive. So we have a very well-versed, well-regarded security team, and they did come up with a specific solution for this that we consider highly safe. I can get into that in the next point, I guess. And then Gabe mentioned one aspect of the organization challenge. I think another one is it was really foreseeable to, if we wanted to make the migration itself happen, that it will be itself a challenge, like how to dedicate people to it. And typically what happens is that, or it could happen sometimes that an existing team picks it up, and then unfortunately in those scenarios you may have competing priorities, and so therefore the migration itself will suffer. And we chose to address that particular concern by creating a tiger team. And I'm kind of jumping ahead, but like making sure that the people were well aligned with the goal of the migration, and they could declare success and were not being distracted.
Well, along the side of how did you prepare for that migration? So you created a tiger team for that, but what are some of the aspects that overall that prepared your organization to migrate? And that's a question for both of you, but since you already started to talk about the tiger team, I would definitely like to hear more about that. How did you set up that tiger team actually?
Yeah, so it was informed by the concern we just discussed. Like, so we had to make sure that the security concern was addressed, and the specific solution we chose was, and GitHub made it available for us, was to use short-lived certificates that we sign and can make sure that it originates from the authenticity is granted. So we used SSH certs and essentially really short-lived certificates to get it done. We knew ahead of time that we built custom tooling, productivity tooling in Bitbucket that we relied on heavily, and those had to be ported. So we made sure that those were ported and tested well ahead of time. And then I guess a final concern was that we do have some monorepos with considerable history, PR history, and of course commit history. And we wanted to make the migration as the least disruptive possible. So we were being less geographically distributed at the time. We could just say 48 hours of downtime was okay, and wanted to make sure that we could fit into that window when migrating these bigger repositories. We chose to shorten the history to a year, and it turns out later that we didn't need to, but we wanted to err on the safe side of things. Yeah, and this approach combined with, I guess, a last winning thing, which was really leaning into automation as much as possible, so not waiting for product teams to do the lifting, meant that we finished the migration way ahead of schedule and with less effort, right?
Wait, how long then?
I think we were ahead of schedule by 3 quarters.
Wow.
So essentially our original strategy relied on teams following a script to move their repositories. And then we realized that this can be highly automated and done in batches, and we just closed it out in a few weeks. Yeah. And I wanna maybe, Gabe already referred to this, but in this process, we invited GitHub to be our partner, and of course this was a collaboration, and they had excellent resources when we were exploring this path, and using those resources I would highly recommend, and really excellent experts to unblock you on this path. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I love our services team. They definitely know how to do a lot of the migrations. Gabe, I was lucky enough to be there for some of your migrations because I got to work with you for a couple of years. But I know for yours it was a little more ongoing because you had a couple of different teams move at different times. How did you prepare the organization for a lot of the migrations over to GitHub?
Sure. So we in Blue Yonder, we grew many times by acquisition. So we have many different systems. It's not just Bitbucket, actually. We had Bitbucket and we had ClearCase and we had others too. What we did was to try to get early successes, right? So if you're gonna try to boil the ocean, it's gonna fail. But you can't also do it drop by drop either. So we kind of took all the new initiatives in Blue Yonder and said, let's start first with the greenfields. So anybody that starts a new development in Blue Yonder, the repos are going to be there. But if we had let everybody just ram through the gates and just do whatever they want in GitHub, that would be unmanageable. And our goal in Blue Yonder is to have the teams that manage our development support systems to be as lean as possible and to rely as much as possible on automation and delegation of autonomy, right, to other teams. So we first had to create what you call the first set of GitOps of automations, not for STM, but the organization itself. How opinionated creation of repos that will be created with specific rules, etc. So heavy use of the GitHub APIs from the get-go in order to automate creation of specific kind of rules in repos of teams inside of it. So make sure that every repo has a set of 3 teams, etc. Once that was set, and that was done mainly as a collaboration between the CI/CD guild of Blue Yonder and the development support. So people that were really passionate and did that on their evenings with people that came from the old world of Bitbucket. So that worked really well, and we were able to accommodate the greenfields really quick. Then came the ones that were the more mature brownfields. So little by little, we started moving them. So that was fairly easy, and we did use the services from GitHub and the partners of GitHub as well. And last but not least, we have always the ones that, yes, they were using Git, they were using Bitbucket, but they were probably using it a little bit the wrong way, like storing big artifacts such as jar and zips and all that stuff. And I know that you can do that in GitHub, but that's not the place in SCM code. It's, it's for GitHub artifacts or Artifactory or some other things. So these had to go not just through the process of going to GitHub, but kind of first clean up your repos before you move to GitHub. So, you can have like a clean thing. So this whole process was not only about moving to GitHub, but it's about really modernizing the tool chain that you have and how you're using Git in general, SCM in general.
I love hearing about the different approaches. Yeah, we have so many customers that vary on the different status they were at before they wanted to move to GitHub. So hearing two kind of similar yet different kind of beginning and ending. So I think that's very exciting.
By the way, something else to note that was, gotcha. We are big fans of not managing things in parallel and different things. So the integration with our security was paramount, and not just the integration of, that's obvious to use SAML or SSO to just log in for the users to log into the UI of GitHub. No, think about the other things that are less obvious. You're a developer. You have tokens to be able to commit to SSH or HTTPS from your dev machine. Let's say tomorrow you're no longer in the company, you left the company. You want to be able to decommission those as the things flow from your identity provider inside of the company. In our case, it was a combination. It's a combination of Azure AD and and Duo, right, for two-factor authentication. But you want all these systems working flawlessly. You don't want to be able to have to manage the users in GitHub and in your source of truth. So that was and that worked very well.
I think there's a lot that's like relatable. I mean, obviously, as someone who works inside, I haven't ever had to make the migration onto it, but we are constantly like looking at different new technologies and trying to understand whether or not this is something that we want to move on to, or where something that like we really pride ourselves on is that we do everything that we do on GitHub. And so if there's something new that we are kind of beta testing internally or staff shipping internally, right, we want to test that out. And we also have to figure out, like, do we want fan out work, right, where that's the term we use, right, for all of the, for work to land in all the different teams for them to kind of come onto the new system? Or do we want to start with a few teams, see if there's like a little bit of virality around it, and getting people energized and saying, hey, did you see that? I want to try that too, right? And then posting those learnings so that everyone else can benefit from that as well. We definitely have a combo of using some of that internally as well. And that's all in the name of getting that benefit that you all are putting in the work for, right? Like, for any transition that we have to do, for any sunsetting we have to do, right? You need like a V team or some people who are willing to put in the extra work for that transition in the hopes that there's going to be benefit at the end. So my question is kind of like, what have you noticed on the benefit side, the biggest change in productivity since moving over for the two of you?
Let me start with the negatives. So, and it's going to be interesting because I think they turned into stories. So we had with all its flaws, Bitbucket had a few conveniences that were productivity features built in. One of those were how PRs were managed, and for enterprises like Block, where some of the PRs span multiple files, the GitHub model at the time was not really, which is really just rendering all the changes on a single page, was not really easily navigable. And so we identified this early on after our migration as a concern, and fortunately, we could connect with the right product managers at GitHub, so we could convince them that this is a pressing concern. And this work got prioritized, and today's product reflects the change. So that's the plus in the story. Another thing we noted was just generally, again, some of these problems come out at enterprise scale because of how we use Git in larger repos, were UI performance concerns that we identified. And again, we flagged that concern early on, and GitHub was again receptive, and they formed their own Tiger team to just go after and methodically chip away at this problem. And also of positive note is that we got like regular updates on the progress, and today it's less of a concern or non-existent. So what else? So again, I'm starting with the negative, but as you can see, these turn into good stories. One thing that I just want to put on everyone's radar, like for us, is like enterprise managed users were not a feature at the time. It's sort of like a walled garden. We had to come up with a different solution, and one of the problems with that is really you have users who have their own GitHub identity, and you somehow, which can be completely different from what their typical LDAP is internally, and you have to come up with a way to map between the two. So that's something we had to cross, and it exists. And is it truly a productivity problem? No. The fact that I think our users internally are more like they just know each other by their name and LDAP, so that comes more naturally. So we had to build an extension, browser extension, and some specific tooling to this. But what else? Let me just cheat sheet. On the positive side, so extensibility is a supremely great feature. So we could shift all our existing internal tooling specific to Block. And there are many, and that's a great gain. I mentioned third-party extensions existing. That's also a gain. Of course, the other thing, like being a fintech company and software being our bread and butter, just having an SCM that is always there for us is just an implied gain. And of course, not having to care and feed and maintain and upgrade and do all that is in fact in itself a gain. And then I think the third mentionable thing is that the thing I mentioned before is that GitHub is an ecosystem. So like you get this single pane of glass where a lot of the things are present in a single place. So PR feedback is the natural place where you can provide your developers the information they need and block them on if you want them. So yeah.
So as far as benefits and productivity, so I'm going to start from the end because Gabor actually just mentioned that. The fact that you don't manage your own servers. I don't recall in my 2-3 years dealing with GitHub that ever I got a message, the server is down for update. It doesn't happen because that's what, when you have proper high availability, you can, upgrade things, and they have it down to a science, which is really good. So teams can always be up. The surprising thing, well, I knew it was going to be good, but I didn't know it was going to be this good. The fact that we don't have to constrain ourselves that much more with runners and CI/CDs, that is huge. Like we always had those arguments. Do we have enough Jenkins runners? I don't have enough Jenkins runners. I need another VM, provision another VM. All of a sudden, we kind of let things loose. Now, not completely loose because it's a two-edged sword, right? You do get a certain amount of minutes for CI/CD and GitHub, but you do pay extra as you choose more. But what it kind of exposed is how long did things work previously in Jenkins and you didn't even know. Like it worked, like, are we cool for these kind of, CI/CD or a build running for 3 hours where it should maybe take 20 minutes? People didn't have visibility to these kind of things. And the fact that now GitHub, again, single pane of glass, gives you visibility to how much you're consuming compute in your organizations for CI/CD, that and the fact that you can scale like elastically, that is pretty amazing. And our developers cannot say enough good things about their ability to now build or run their CI/CDs. There are of course improvements, and I have to cheer on the collaboration going on with the GitHub account management team and engineering team of how we can improve it, right? From being able to offload asynchronous CI/CDs maybe, or to how to nicely track deployment pipeline, right? The whole concept of environments and deployments in GitHub. So we see a lot of benefits already, and a lot of them are emerging. And last but not least, the visibility of the security team of what's going on in the organization by team, according to tokens, according to problems in security, etc. That is a great benefit. And of course, everybody knows GitHub, right? You know, we could have gone to another tool. Maybe the tool would have been, as far as features, more rich. But to me, and we even measure that. We have metrics, time until your first meaningful PR as a new employee in a team. We measure that. Then with GitHub, it's just like goes through the roof. You know, being productive. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, I love there are a couple consistent themes that I kind of heard through both of these. Just being able to not maintain something on premise, maintaining server equipment for your SCM side, but also from the action side or from the CI/CD side in your case, Gabe. So my question would be, now that you don't have that burden of maintaining that operational components on-prem, what are some of the things that you can focus on that are a lot more maybe valuable of your time now? Gabe, let's start with you, since you kind of touched on some of those.
Sure. So now that you know, somebody else takes care of the bread, now you can deal with the butter, which means
That's the tastier part.
I know, right? So now you can start saying, okay, how can, now that we have all the framework and the platform that GitHub gives us, how can we start measuring metrics better, right? How long does a PR take? Why does it take too long? We have integration to Jira. How long does it take from ideation of something till the time it's being deployed all the way through? Because our CI/CDs in GitHub control the deployment as well. We can measure all these things in each and every single environment. You know, the usability of the CI/CD, it's very common. And last but not least, and no talk is complete if we don't talk about you know, ChatGPT and the like, right? Now, to put aside Copilot, we're talking about, okay, what can we get from the metrics that we get from GitHub, and what kind of interesting kind of deduction or insights we can get from that, and see all the hidden patterns that are happening in organizations, in groups and teams, and how we can give better recommendations how to do that. So what it allows us to do is to move up in the Maslow pyramid of SCM.
Or something similar? Or?
Very similar. I think just you know, the fact that we didn't have to, or don't have to maintain our instances and deal with the upgrades, the scalability issues is definitely one. I love what Gabe just said about like metrics. That was instantly like one of our go-to places once the migration was over. It was essentially one of the last pieces we completed, is to get our hands on the rich source, like rich data that GitHub offers, and we moved it into our data lake and exposed it in dashboards for our stakeholders, like line managers, and for them. But most importantly, in aggregate, they are extremely useful for teams like mine to see where the tooling gaps are and where can we do better. So you can interestingly see, I mentioned like some of our custom tooling that we do is one example I'm going to pick is we have a tool called OwnerOwl, which has to do with like ownership delegation in our monorepos, which is not something GitHub offers today, but something, a gap we had to close. And we can look at the data and see how effective that tool is. You know, are we spamming users? Are they, you know, essentially you can measure how fast people react when some assignment is made. So by the way, there are great articles on this from other sources than us, and there are companies that are way ahead of us on this. There is one from Facebook, like essentially doing exactly this optimizing, using data to optimize your tool. Yeah.
I think something else that I heard you mention earlier that I wanted to move over to is getting early access to features, right? And that's like a big benefit. And so I was curious, you mentioned MergeQ, which is one of our teams as well. So it's nice to hear that you all are enjoying it so far, and I'm sure I'd love to hear afterwards what your list is of what you want as well. But I'm curious for the two of you, right? Like if you could provide some insight on how beneficial it is to have early access to features and releases versus like on server.
So I want to say it's extremely useful. So I have not that many experience with working with third parties, but I find it very unique that when I talk to our accounts team and I raise my hand that we need your help, many a time saying, hey, I need help connecting with internal engineering resources, I find it very easy to connect. And so you brought up MergeQ as an example, and I want to give kudos to Will Smythe, who has been our go-to partner. And we have been we are trying to do our best to set the context and priority for GitHub to internally gauge how important these requests are, but they have been really receptive. And again, we are trying to do our best to support it with our own internal data, user demand, and all that. But in the specific example, we have been on, I want to say, Will's radar from the ideation phase, and we have been going through many iterations with this tool, and I feel we got to influence the roadmap, and we have seen breakthroughs along the way. And one such breakthrough was when GitHub has the tradition of dogfooding. They started to use this particular product internally on their GitHub repo, and that's when I finally saw that it was clicking, that some of our needs were instantly clicking, and they got what I was asking for. So some of the features coming are super exciting. So there are many other examples. So we have been, I want to give kudos to Jim Boyle, who is on the, I want to say API, not API, it's more audit logs and
audit logs.
Yes. We had a good relationship that we forged between him and someone on our internal security team, and he has been really responsive in adding features to plug holes. And finally, a third example that comes to mind is Ryan Salva, who we built a relationship with. He came, gave us a talk about how to treat platform as a product internally at Square or Block, which was really awesome. But we have been connecting on one of his babies is Copilot, and we have been really excited to see that product from the start. Of course, we have our enterprise concerns we have been relaying it to, and you can see that the product is evolving in the direction we would like it to. So that's really great.
So for us, we're lucky. I guess it's a pattern to have a good account team in GitHub. So folks like Sarah used to be ours, and Dwayne and Jody and David and others, very helpful and very attentive in bringing the right product team inside of GitHub to discuss pain points. And the concept of having empathy to the customer is a big deal in GitHub, and all the way down to engineering. All those that think that engineers don't have empathy, I implore you to see the culture inside of GitHub, which is awesome. So we don't have monorepo. Also, a small secrets, we have north of 3,000 repos in Blue Yonder. So we're big fans of multi-repo. And how do you manage multi-repos? Over more than 2,000 developers. And how do you reuse things? So the whole thing about, the whole journey around reusable workflows and kind of mandated workflows and all that kind of thing, that is a dialogue that was going on, a partnership going on for many months with the team in GitHub, and getting early access, saying, does it work for you guys? Is it okay? And we were giving things back and forth to the point that I'm saying, like, I don't want to be the bottleneck here. Let's bring some engineering resources that are passionate about it from Blue Yonder and from GitHub. And there was no need to have like a bottleneck Bob in the middle, if you guys are familiar with that cartoon. So that is great. And to me, again, one of the biggest features, it's not a feature because security is not a feature, it's security, is the need that you don't have to think about patching your servers anymore, right? Oh, you have a hard bleed, you need to go. No, that's it. It's out of your scope altogether. And if you have a server, now you are worried. You own the patching and the downtime and all that kind of stuff. In this case, it's GitHub. That's it.
I want to say, especially on the engineering side, right? Like, Gabe, I should have you come and talk to our engineers. They'd be so happy to hear that you see that we're empathetic, which I think is true. It's something that we start when we interview people from the very beginning, is that passion for our users and understanding what they need. And sometimes it can feel like we as developers kind of understand our users better because of that, but also being really clear about what's GitHub specific and what's not is a really important value for us. And like, if a brand new feature ships and no one uses it, did it ever happen, right? So it's really important for us to get to work with you all, understand your use cases, understand your pain points. I want you all to be able to focus on your innovation and moving forward the industry in your own ways and not have to worry about the day-to-day monotony, right? Like, we want to make you, my team's name is Core Productivity for a reason, right? Like, we want to make you as productive as possible. So it's really nice to hear that. And I continue to want to, you're at least, Gabor, you were naming a few people who are like on our team, right? So we want to know, especially if you are familiar with like developers, there's thousands of decisions that we have to make on a day-to-day basis that kind of influence and nudge the product towards one way or the other. And if we don't know what our users want on the other side, right, we could end up with something completely different. And so the more that we talk to you all, the better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely one of the middle players here. Like, I'm between the customer and the engineering product team. So I get to see the in between, but I definitely love to hear that from the engineering side as well. I definitely represent a lot of the customer feedback that we receive, because I think the thing that we value most of our customers, especially those that we have very close relationships with, you provide feedback to us every day. There's never a time when we know that something's not right, you're going to tell us before we even say anything. We know it's happening, but that's our community. Our customers, our community, our developers on our platform all expect the best out of us, and we want to make sure that we're always delivering that. So we only have about 5 minutes. So I'm going to skip one of the questions, actually even less than 5 minutes, but I'm going to skip one of the questions that we had. The one question that I am skipping was some of the third-party or other products that you're using with GitHub outside of just GitHub SCM, but we kind of talked about it a little bit already. So advanced security actions and a few others in between. But the latest and greatest, the phoenix in the room, it's not the elephant in the room, it's the phoenix in the room, is Copilots. Would love to hear overall, what are you excited about Copilot and Copilot X, especially you're on cloud, so it's a lot easier to use, especially if you want to use it with code spaces. But anyway, I'm very excited to hear what you're excited about Copilot and Copilot X.
Okay, I can go first.
You want to go first, Gabo?
Oh, if you have an answer.
So we have been running still, in the last days of running kind of a trial in our organization, a limited trial of this, of Copilot. And I'm going to share later on with the team the feedback. But in general, there has been a lot of naysayers and there has been a lot of hype on the other side. Oh, we're not going to need developers. or oh, this is crap, right? I think the truth is out there in the middle, and there still remains to be seen how much benefit you're really getting as far as productivity, and whether it returns the ROI. Probably it is. What I'm excited about is not dealing with the boilerplate code, especially when you start up a new service or a new UI. I think that's where Copilot shines. So kind of like think about the old wizards in Visual Studio Code, but that is like on steroids. So it understands far better what you're going to do, and little by little actually learns your way of doing things as an individual, yet not as an organization, I think. So we're working on that. To me, there's probably going to be a lot of discussion inside of Blue Yonder whether it's worth it or not. But to me, the ultimate thing, and I think Copilot might not still be there, is how does it deal with refactor? You rarely, in companies such as ours, deal with all the time new code, a new service that you need to come up with. A lot of what you do is bug fixing and refactoring and refactoring and refactoring and refactoring. And the next step that we want to see in Copilot, and I told this to the team, is how does it deal with refactoring of existing things? So for instance, you want to move, I don't know, with Python to fast API or to something else. How does it deal with that over a whole repo? So I think there is still a lot of promise. On the side note, I did notice it personally that I'm just like jotting down CSV files for data, and it just guesses what is the data that I want to put in there for testing. And that is borderline creepy, kind of read your mind thing, which is awesome.
So I think generative AI, and Copilot is an example of that, has a huge potential. And I think I agree with Gabe. The current implementation suggesting new code is great. One observation from my end is that a lot of times, so Block being an enterprise, we have a lot of things we do our own way, and a lot of times, we rely on internal APIs, libraries, and the suggestions that Copilot today comes up with depends on, my understanding, on the IDE context, files being open in the IDE, and those might not be the right ones to base your suggestion off of, and definitely not the open source model, right? So I'm kind of wary that it might not suggest the solution we would like it to. So I think this bridge can be closed by just taking the right context, and I think GitHub already sits on the right context because it indexes all of our source code in search. So I just don't know how to use the context window more wisely. That would, in my opinion, be one way to close this gap and make the suggestions more company specific and useful, essentially. But we are looking at Copilot and trying to evaluate its pros and cons for decision. And things again, as I mentioned, the team, Ryan Salva, is very receptive and has been already making many tweaks to address legal concerns and other concerns as well. So I have high hopes for the team to deliver next steps.
Yeah, I mean, I have a purview of about 15 to 20 customers that I talk to that are all very excited about Copilot as well. But Gabe, to your point about the refactoring, or even not only refactoring, but bug fixes or security bug fixes. Those are some of the things that Copilot X we're testing out and kind of experimenting and internally beta testing it as well. So I think there's going to be some really exciting moments that are going to be coming out with some of the new features that Copilot X are kind of prepping us for.
And also feel free to dream big and tell us what else would be really great if, right? We're talking, do we really need to be writing PR descriptions by default, right? Like there's a lot of different areas when you're even thinking about the website. Anytime you have to do something repetitively, right? We want to make that easier for you and with the right context, obviously. So if there's anything that's on your mind that you say, wouldn't it be great if, it's not like, obviously it's a free for all, but as Gabor was saying earlier, right? You know, it's really important for us to get a signal from you all, understand where your head's at, and that kind of factors into what weights higher and what weights lower, right? So some of my teams are starting to invest in some of these areas as well. So you're more than welcome to come to me and share your dreams with me. I can't promise anything, but it will get put in the right place so that we can make the better decisions together. So yeah.
That's great. Well, I think we're at the end of our time. I really want to thank both of you for coming virtually and in person to talk to us today. For those on the chat, we're so thankful. For those on the Zoom, thank you for jumping on. For those in the room, thank you for coming in. And that's what we have today. We're so excited to continue talking to you about everything cloud journey, plus Copilot, plus advanced security, plus action. So feel free to reach out to your account teams, to your, as you hear, we have great account teams. And we'll definitely connect you to our great engineering teams and great product teams. So we're very excited to continue these conversations beyond just this panel. Thank you all.